Good morning, everyone. It's very nice to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us for the Mandela Indaba, titled From Dalibhunga to Rolihlahla, Making Trouble with Mandela. My job, I'm Jenny Dupree, by the way, and my job is just going to be as program director. Also, if you have any concerns as the Indaba unfolds, please feel free to get hold of me or any one of my team. They're the people who've been registering you. And just let us know and we'll do our best to help. I would like to just start with a few housekeeping things. The bathrooms are straight outside here. And then for safety, the sake of safety, if there's an emergency, which we are planning for that not to happen, if you could please slowly exit your nearest door and then follow the exit signs to the left out to, there's an assembly point sign on the grass outside by the parking. If you could just assemble there for us to debrief, please do so slowly and in orderly fashion. Thank you. Then a few more notes. I'm sure you've all received the program, so you'll see we have an amazing array of speakers at this Indaba. What we also have is a exhibition, and you'll see it outside in the glass display cabinet. Over here, there's 4 lino cuts, and then behind me and on my left are 2 paintings. These are by Zama Spelman, and they were specifically commissioned for this exhibition. So please do feel free to have a look at them, to go closer when we have a break, and then Zama herself will be giving some input on them with a walk through later today after the rest of the proceedings. Also, as you came in, or if you were here a bit earlier, we were playing a soundscape. This is an initiative of some of our colleagues, Sonia Leeuwenstein, Fortunate Dwacha, and Neil Honeycomb. So that will be playing during breaks in the program. So please listen to that. It's a collection of Mandela-related quotes, songs, and other things. So we really are trying to think about Mandela through various mediums and in different ways, all the facets of Mandela, and then how we go beyond that. Final note that the Mandela University Press books, or some of them, are on sale. Just next to the canteen, there is a little stall there. It's the Mandela University shop. I just want to say thank you to them for coming through. And so if you're interested in looking at what is available to purchase from the press, it's our very own university press, very, very new. I think it was launched last year. So please do have a look at that as well. Finally, I would like to call up our Vice Chancellor, Prof. Sibongile Mutwa, to do the opening and welcome before we get into our first panel. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jenny. Hey, Uchena. It's lovely to see you. What a surprise. You know, Jenny, her things always happen so fast that I was like thinking that I might read my yesterday's speech. So I had to rally really fast. Yeah, so thank you very much, Jenny, for always being so punctual and getting us online. So thank you very much, colleagues. Mine is a small task this morning to welcome you to Indaba, Mandela Indaba, Dalibhunga to Rolihlahla, Making Trouble with Mandela. So I want to thank you as a program director. I also want to recognize our registrar who's going to be facilitating the next sessions. I want to recognize Professor Van Harris, who has been one of the leading brains behind this initiative in teams. And I want to recognize the speakers, the Deputy Vice Chancellors, the students, our supporters, our co-travelers, the academy, and all members of the university and our community at large, and our friends of our university. Welcome to our university's first Mandela Indaba, even though it does not feel like the first for me because of the colloquium in 2019, which set us in motion as the university on this path that we are on today. A special word of welcome to the leadership of our sister legacy institutions carrying the Mandela name, Dr. Mbongiseni Buthelezi. I've just seen Mbo here. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. I've seen Judy Sikuza, who is the CEO of the Mandela Roads Foundation, and Dr. Vuyani Boy, who is the CEO of the Mandela Museum. In Judy's case, I'm tempted to also say welcome home, as Judy is one of our eminent alumni. The theme of this Indaba, Dalibhunga to Rolihlahla, making trouble with Mandela, is a rich one and it is layered with meaning. It speaks to our university's ongoing journey with the name, which, as you know, changed to Nelson Mandela from NMMU in 2017. In 2019, the Dalibhunga, this time that Mandela colloquium was held, the first big event at the university that sought to engage substantively with Mandela, the social figure, and the multiplicity of Mandelas that are available to us to both deconstruct and make meaning with. I want to thank you, Andre, for staying the course with this project as well. In many ways, the theme for this Indaba suggests an answer to the question, this time that Mandela, from that 2019 colloquium. In the face of massive shifts in global power, ecological and climate change on an unprecedented scale, technological advancements beyond what we imagined could be possible, and the crisis of democracy as we see a rise in the far right, ever-increasing misinformation and backlash against social justice gains, maybe we need Rolihlahla, the troublemaker. On Nelson Mandela International Day this year, the chairperson of Nelson Mandela Foundation Board, Dr. Naledi Pandor, delivered the keynote address at the United Nations headquarters in New York, which was very inspiring. She called on leaders, on institutions and individuals to make good trouble in pursuit of a more just world. This call is embedded in the Nelson Mandela Foundation 2025 to 28 strategy, Rolihlahla, making good trouble. Given the fluid geopolitical situation, the difficulties, including the matters of social legitimacy that higher education globally and nationally face, and the challenges facing South African society, as you all know them if you read our society, we need to take the call from the Nelson Mandela Foundation seriously. Now seems to be the time to make good trouble. As we listen and converse over the next 2 days, I would like to ask you to keep the question of what it might mean for us as a university to make good trouble in this time at this place. As we work to trouble and mobilize the legacy of Mandela and the ways in which it has been taken up in this time, such as when the President of the United States recently compared himself to Mandela while taking in white South Africans who are supposed to be refugees, dismantling diversity and equity programs and policies, and attacking academic freedoms. We also need to remember that we can only make good trouble if if we are open to troubling ourselves. This includes troubling not only our university and its role in society, but also the university as a concept. Self-reflexivity in its most discomforting and unsettling form becomes an essential ambition that we need to have. It becomes a place, the university becomes a place of contemplation, a challenging and a dwelling place where we need to do this work. Making good trouble includes straining forward towards our road to transformation, Africanization and decolonization, recognizing how the unequal power structures of colonial modernity still shape the world today, and that they need to be deeply troubled and they need to be disrupted down to their foundations. Making good trouble also means accepting that the meanings and significances of the Mandela name will change over time, and it will continue to require constant reconsideration. This is troubling in the continuous sense. It is an endless process of questioning, of deconstructing, of decentering, of synthesizing, in order to stay alive to his true legacy of service. Over the next few days, we'll be listening and engaging with provocations by a range of speakers in this rich program that I've seen. We will be listening to the Deputy Vice Chancellors, to the members of faculty, and to students, speaking about how they understand our university's relationship to Mandela, in italics. Today, we will also be listening to other institutions who carry the Mandela name that I've mentioned, to hear how they themselves navigate this responsibility. Tomorrow, we will hear how Frantz Fanon, even though he and Mandela never met, how can they be brought together, both as figures with great significance for the ongoing pursuit of social justice. However, the heart of the Indaba is the time we will spend with the draft Embedding Mandela document. It is a wonderful piece of work, which I think we need to work with. This document is ultimately meant to serve as a resource for the university in terms of how we carry the Mandela name. Finally, I think it is worth mentioning that making good trouble requires authenticity and integrity and courage. It is also something that we cannot do alone. I hope that this Indaba will set in motion a series of courageous conversations as we seek to deepen our clarity as to what the Mandela legacy offers us. A legacy that we at once embrace while we also set free. Because the colloquium in 2019 urged us to conceive and to hold Mandela in plural. With these few words, please consider yourselves welcome and the Indaba opened. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Mutwa. So our first panel today will be Embedding Mandela across the portfolios, featuring our DVCs. And to facilitate that session is our registrar, Edgar de Kooker. I'd like to call him up to introduce the speakers. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. When I came in, the house wasn't as full. Now I feel a bit intimidated. But I'm glad that you are here. And I've been looking forward to today. I don't often get an opportunity to ask questions to DVCs and then moderate them. Oh, this is going to be exciting today. So I think the first DVC we're going to call up, and I think maybe what we can do is we fill up from the middle. I'll be sitting on this side, and then we go from there. Perhaps VC, if you would like to join us now or later on after the DVCs have spoken as a response to their inputs. It's like almost like a pre-KPA. Okay, so maybe later on we'll ask you to come sit and join us. Okay, so let's start with our first DVC, Mr. Luthando Jack. He's our Deputy Vice Chancellor for People and Operations. Luthando, please join us. And then our second DVC is Dr. Muki Muheng, DVC for Learning and Teaching. The next one is Professor Auswendini Moronga, DVC Research, Innovation and Internationalization. And then, of course, Professor Andre Kiet, DVC for Engagement and Transformation Portfolio. All right, so VC colleagues were speaking this morning about the many layers of the Mandela name. And I found that very interesting. And then VC also spoke about making good trouble. And then my brain started to short circuit because good trouble, we don't normally associate goodness with trouble. And then VC explained what that meant. And it was very interesting. And so there are many meanings to the name Mandela, and in terms of the documents that we had received, you would have seen speaks about various figures like social and justice, the intellectual Mandela, the engagement Mandela. That's you, Andre. Yeah. The transformation. Oh, that's you too. And then troubling. I spoke about trouble and troubling and so on. So we have different portfolios this morning, and so your focus areas are also different in terms of what it does for the university and in the university. So my question then is, and perhaps we'll start with you, Dr. Muheng. What does Mandela mean to you at this particular point in time, and how do you think we can engage at the university? Speaking from your portfolio perspective.
All right, thank you so much. It's so difficult to speak from a portfolio's perspective because I think we need to start first and foremost to speak as human beings. I would like to look at Mandela in his entirety as a multidimensional, very complex human being and not just one-dimensional. And I'm drawn to his leadership principles, which he displayed right through his life. And I think that is something important, not to just take aspects of who he was when we feel comfortable with that era of his whole being. His commitment to social justice as this university is something that we align ourselves with: equality, freedom, human rights. His discernment to understand his role in influencing the struggle in particular different moments of his life. As a young person, understanding how to engage with authority and resist it. And then in his later life, also understanding his role to lead and unite South Africa, because that's the kind of leadership that we needed at the time. And I'm also thinking of Mandela today as the world is drifting towards isolationism, geopolitical camps, religious fundamentalism, And I ask myself, what would Mandela have done as a young Mandela, as well as the more mature, wise Mandela? And how do we then, as Nelson Mandela University, having students who are young, ourselves as academics who are older, and administrative staff, how do we look at ways to navigate this life experience of Nelson Mandela as we look at that? And our responsibility then is to constantly reflect on his commitment to social justice, to human rights, to equality, to freedom, and understand our responsibility as a university. And a university as a place of knowledge co-creation, generation, transfer, and a place for celebration and contestation of ideas, not only the ones that we would like to hear, but different ideas from ours. And what are we offering the world against these commitments and these ideas? That is important. So it is through conversations such as these, through our curricula, as well as through engaged scholarship, collaborations and partnerships that we choose as Nelson Mandela to associate ourselves with. It is also in our institutional culture. You know, how when people go onto our campuses, you know, they've got this feeling of Mandela-ness. They can't pinpoint it, but it's how we speak, it's how we walk, it's what we do, it's in our buildings, it's in our students, how they express themselves, how we engage with them. That institutional culture, that is unique and should be just associated with Nelson Mandela University. I think I'm going to end it there, Reg. Thank you.
Thank you. I like the way how you brought it from, you know, the big picture down to the Mandela-ness that you spoke about. I made a note of that. So Professor Moronga, what would this mean to you? What does the name mean to you? And how do you see this playing out in your portfolio?
Thank you, Registrar. So first of all, I think most of what is said in the document, it makes me wonder whether this is the first Indaba. It looks like I have been through the Indaba by reading the document itself. At our institution, we have Vision 2030. It's a guiding campus for the whole institution. And within the Vision 2030, you will start to see what we are discussing today coming through across that Vision 2030. So basically for me, it is to enforce or to reinforce and unpack what is in Vision 2030, because Vision 2030 is at very much high level. And this work from teams and CriSHET is really assisting us to unpack what we have said in very high level form. And there in Vision 2030, you will find that we had an aspiration. And that aspiration is to pursue an impactful research, innovation, and internationalization. And for me, is do I see Mandela, the discussion today, in the word impactful? What does it mean, impactful research? What does it mean, impactful innovation? And I think if Mandela was here, he will say, that I support. Because impactful, it means it has to have impact in the greater society. It means the research that you do must have an impact in the greater society. And that's what we aspire to do. And that's what probably for me a Mandela will mean. But also at the same time, for me, it means not just accepting what we see as given. Yeah? I think that's important to note. And it speaks to knowledges. Do we just take the knowledges that we see today and work with them? or do we want to change? And from my discipline, of course, we live with uncertainties. Yeah? How did Mandela, through his journey, live with uncertainties? How did he navigate the uncertainties? So we will have to learn. But also the dualities and the multiplicities and the fact that within our institution we have different contesting ideas. Do we want a single idea, or do we want to live with multiplicity and be directed by the campus? And that campus is, for us as an institution, is Vision 2030 as it is at the moment. So, Registrar, that's how I will end our view in terms of Mandela and, in particular, research, innovation, and internationalization. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Both you and Dr. Moyeng spoke about the contestations, which tells me that we're not satisfied about where we are at the moment. We want something better. That's what I'm hearing you saying. So I'm going to ask Mr. Jack the same question. In your portfolio, which is fairly large, so I'm sure you have some really good insights to add to what we've already heard.
Thanks, Edgar, and good morning, colleagues. Maybe let me just start by saying I'll end with what I think we need to respond as a portfolio. But let me just start by making general reflections. Of course, I concur with my colleagues in terms of the discussion document. It is indeed a good a discussion document. I think for me, Mandela, and I think the discussion document does talk to this. Mandela is, as a social figure, is produced and reproduced by a society that is in motion. So there is therefore that permanent interconnectedness between Mandela and his society. That is important. In other words, the wholeness within which we look at Mandela. Actually, not Mandela, at Mandela. Because we tend to insulate Mandela from the conditions that produced him. We tend to insulate him from his fellow travelers, from his contemporaries, from his generation, from his generation across race, gender, class, rural-urban divide, of our society. There is a tendency to privilege particular aspects, of Mandela, instead of taking a whole view of Mandela. Because if we take the whole view of Mandela, then, again, I think as the discussion document says, then we'll see Mandela as an ordinary human being, just like all of us, who is fallible. And he says this himself, that he's not a saint. If he's a saint, then a saint is a sinner who keeps on repenting. Which then talks to this notion of perfection, that there is no such a thing as perfection. We are all in a state of becoming, as being shaped and continually being reshaped, by the conditions as well as the context within which we find ourselves in. Probably I will come back later, just in terms of the names, his names, including Rolihlahla, because there are two meanings to Rolihlahla. But I will come to that a little bit later. So in the context of our university, as well as in the context of the moment that we find ourselves in, as the world today, as well as the country, 31 years later, after the 1994 democratic breakthrough, I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, what is it that our democracy seeks to center? What is it that our democracy seeks to decenter? And what is it that our democracy seeks to recenter? What is it that we want to decenter? And what underpins? What is the underpinning philosophy behind our democracy now, 31 years later? Because what is it that holds us together as the nation? We know what holds us together, I'm assuming, as Nelson Mandela University, its Vision 2030. It's our vision, as the university. But I think we can't talk about the political moment, political and the social moment, without asking ourselves, what is it that holds us together? Is our democracy appropriate for our context? 31 years later. And then, of course, in the context of my own portfolio, because we're dealing with human beings, with people who have said we would want to privilege Ubuntu not as a value, not just as a value, but as a philosophy, as would want to recenter Ubuntu as a guiding philosophy in terms of how we would want our university to be experienced by those who encounter it, by our students, as well as by our staff. And we're building in terms of that on research that has shown that, at least from the side of our students, one of the things that our students value much is how they are experiencing Ubuntu, in this university. So I just want to end there, Edgar. I will come back later with regards to Rolihlahla, Mandela, Madiba, Nelson, what is in a name, and in the context of privileging indigenous knowledge, because I think that is missing in the discussion document. The African, the true meaning, the other meaning of Rolihlahla, other than trouble, causing trouble, as well as the meaning of Mandela as opposed to Mandela. That is, in the context of isiXhosa, a lost meaning in terms of how we just pronounce it. Thanks.
I like the idea around the shaping and the reshaping. Again, it is a constant move towards something. And then you left us with that question about, but what holds us together? Because that is sort of, if I understood you correctly, is the direction that we're going. And then, of course, you left us with a teaser at the end about the meanings of the names of Mandela. So we will come back to that in a while. Professor Keert, from your perspective, what does Mandela mean to you, and how does that unfold in your portfolio?
Thanks, Edgar, and thank you so much for this event, the colleagues who have worked so hard on it. VC, also your intervention this morning has been spot on, I think, around the metaphor of troubling. I think that historically the 2017-2018 period for the university, and part of the reason why I want to reflect on it is because I want to speak about inheritance. There was a clear acceptance that carrying the name of Mandela would be a massive, massive responsibility for the university beyond a rebranding process. Now, I just want to put that forward. And then, of course, we have had massive, massive support from our council in trying to deepen our engagement with the name Mandela. And part of what we see today and over the past 6-7 years came out of that commitment, and of course also the support later on from Senate as well in the approval of the Transdisciplinary Institute for Mandela Studies. Quite a daunting task, I think, of all the challenges that have been put into the ETP portfolio. That has probably been the most difficult one, but also the most exciting one, if you get the meaning, because I've always, tried to explain, how difficult it is to progress with this massive project. Because if it was easy to progress with the name Mandela, of course it would not be something special in any case, because the answers would be so obvious that it doesn't require any deeper excavations. But we all know that that is not true, just by the sense in which the social figure emerged within the university space. We also had Vuyo and Zandi in that time in people in operations, of course, struggling with how do we reframe the kind of idea of Mandela into the academic expression of Mandela, because we are a university. So if there is something new that we can put on the table, it would be something like that around the question of Mandela. And that in itself is also a very difficult, enterprise to undertake. And I, at the present moment, with, our discussions, am quite happy that the struggle emerged as a struggle. Because I think that the project is never ending, is slippery. You don't know sometimes where you're going with this particular idea. You just have a sense of its importance. And the other issue, of course, is that legacy is not a static inheritance. So at the time that you revisit it, you also revisit its meaning. And of course, in that revisitation, you are obliged to trouble yourself, as per the VC speech this morning. So if you revisit a particular inheritance, you have a responsibility to trouble yourself in the event of that revisitation. And the same it will go with Mandela. So there will be an infinite number and multiplicities of Mandela emerging out of that particular idea, which will place Mandela as a social figure beyond the notion of Mandela itself. It will become an idea, both associated with but also detached from the historical figure. And that idea, will carry with its various programmatic directions, its various values, its various philosophies, and so on. So part of the responsibility as a university is also to teach ourselves not to read history anachronistically, and that is not to read things out of context. In the rigor of intellectual work, if you want to critique something, you have to put forward its total best version of itself and critique that. Not the weak version that makes the critique easy. Okay, that's what we would call putting up a straw figure. And that's not the real intellectual rigor work as well. So we have to avoid anachronistic work, but we should stick to Mandela as an experiment that should be critically engaged with. Now, our university, in its broader totality, is actually a higher education experiment. Not simply because it's a new generation type of university, but it's also a university that generates experimental spaces, like the one that we are gathering today in. So the university's ideal and ideals also emerge, of course, as forms of experimentation, of which Mandela then, emerges as an organizing concept. One can say an organizing figure, one can say an organizing concept. Almost like Mandela as an episteme, if we think of it as a knowledge project, where you read Mandela through its epistemological implications for the science and the work that we will be doing. And of course, then it will touch on to what my colleagues have been saying here as well, and especially the notion of indigenous knowledges and the Africanization of our knowledge project as well. I'll say something later on just around the thematic areas that came through that very productive colloquium that more or less set up, at least in our imaginations, Vern, what may become a Mandela Studies knowledge field, okay? With Mandela, beyond Mandela, through Mandela, in criticism or in critique of Mandela as well. And so here, it's not a kind of reverence for a figure that should be emerging, but what we draw from it as the university being a critical space for engaging with knowledges as well. So for today's world, I think that we're losing a kind of a sense of an inclusive humanity. I think Mukhi presented that very well, so did Azwe as well. So there is a sense that both human and planetary flourishing is under siege, you see, and the two of them actually goes together. There's a huge connection between discriminatory cultures and planetary health, between racism and climate change, okay? And we literally have to name it for what it is. It will be impossible to engage with the challenges of the planet if we don't engage with the discriminatory orders that generate the kinds of challenges that we are facing. So the parameters that we will have to set for our sciences, of course, and this is one of the projects that will emerge, out of this Indaba, would be to think what would an inclusive science look like, that generates an inclusive polity, and how can one engage the scientific project through the lens of Mandela to imagine better forms of collective futures as well. So Edgar, those are my opening remarks. Thank you so much, colleagues.
Thank you, Professor Keith. I think your responses, all of your responses, shown us the complexity of what we are dealing with, but also the responsibility, I think, of how we will go about doing this. So we don't have the answers, and we'll, as we go along, we'll find answers as you say, revisiting, if we continue revisiting our understanding. Now, in the Embedding Mandela document, the draft discussion document, I was reading, the theme about transforming, or how does one create transforming spaces for all knowledge to blossom. And we touched on it earlier about, the indigenous knowledges and so on. And I was wondering what type of leadership attributes one would require to make that happen. Not just that particular aspect of the document. So it'll be interesting to hear from you, what your thoughts are on embedding Mandela in your portfolio. How would one go about in doing that? And maybe this time around, I'm going to start with Mr. Jack, who is the furthest from me at the moment, to respond to that question. How would one embed Mandela in the portfolio going forward?
Yeah, no, thanks, thanks, Edgar. I think let me just before I answer your question, complete what I started with, just with regards to. You'll see how then that links to how one thinks we can then embed Mandela, into the portfolio. Let me just start with the with what is in a name. I think naming is informed by particular conventions. Of course, in an African context, there are particular conventions that inform why am I called Lutando? But in the context of Mandela, I will just take the four names. Of course, Mandela, that's not his name, that's his surname. Of course, the meaning of that is something that grows everywhere. But then you've got Dalibhunga, which is Kahlelo. Dalibhunga, Azwelibanzi, Azanuzuko. That talks to, you find those names given, those is the Kahlelo, given to people of royalty. And then, of course, Rolihlahla. Ihlahla, you find it in two areas in a rural context. I said I'm going to privilege indigenous knowledge because we draw students from different backgrounds, and we've got to then appreciate their lived experiences, as the university. And for historic reasons, universities have not been consistent, with regards to that. Now, Rolihlahla, I mean, Ihlahla is Uhola is to pull. You pull something, and Ihlahla will find it in two spaces in an African rural context for you. I'm not sure how many of us grew up in rural areas. You'll find it eGoqweni as well as eBuhlandi. That's where you'll find Ihlahla. And you pull a branch for two reasons. One, to make fire, so that you can cook and so on. That's what I think we need to bring, into the discussion document with regards to Rolihlahla, and of course the other meaning, which is yes, making trouble, but in defense. I think you make trouble. You make trouble in defense. You pull that in order to defend yourself. And of course, Dalibhunga. The point that I'm trying to make, of course, Dalibhunga is the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. I think their building used to be called of the Nelson Mandela Museum in Umtata used to be called Dalibhunga. Is a place of decision making. That is a decision maker and so on. So I guess then that's where the idea of a multiplicity, of Mandela, and of course Madiba in terms of his heritage, and then Nelson, a colonial name, his name which was given by a teacher, at school. So the point that you are making, Edgar, about us then allowing the coexistence, of different knowledges, in our institution, us allowing the coexistence of different cultures, and creating space for these cultures, to dialogue, to converse. I think our portfolio ought to be central, in doing that, just in terms of how we then design the university infrastructure in its totality, such that it then allows for those conversations, to happen, allow for those contestations to happen, but not in a vacuum. There's got to be, in my view, there's got to be a starting point. If we're talking about allowing all knowledges to converse, but there's got to be a starting point. Some knowledges have been placed in the margins. So there's got to be a deliberate way of ensuring that those knowledges that have been placed in the margins are recentered, if you like, without unnecessarily decentering. I guess that's where then the concept of ecologies of knowledge basically comes in. So from our end, we think that if we recenter Ubuntu as an underpinning philosophy of how we do things, as an underpinning philosophy of our being as a portfolio, as a university, we think that would have then gone a long way, in embedding Mandela. Let me end by saying, in isiXhosa you would say uMandela ngumuntu owayesebenzela uluntu. Now I don't know how I'm going to interpret that, because I'm going to lose meaning. I'm going to lose the essence of its meaning if I'm interpreting it. Somebody maybe can try, but in isiXhosa I would say uMandela ngumuntu owayesebenzela uluntu okanye owayesebenzisana noluntu ukuze luziphuhlise, so he was you would say he was a servant of the people, but that does not necessarily mean what I'm saying, because again, as I end, Edgar, we would say, I'm just talking about the power of indigenous knowledge. We would say, when somebody had passed on, like Mandela, we would say, ibingumuntu uMandela. And then you end it there. Meaning that this was a true epitome of humanity. So imbibing those values as part of our daily lives, as the university, coming naturally, not as a performative act, coming, because that's what Ubuntu is about. Hence, Ubuntu is viewed as wholeness. Of course, not as a concept that is frozen in space and time, as a dynamic, evolving concept that co-evolves with society. But we've got to just imbibe the philosophy of Ubuntu, as well as its underpinning values and its egalitarian ethic, and weave it in, into the entire business of the university. That's basically my argument, as opposed to just reducing it into a value or into something that into this thing of compassion, care, and so on. And yet, it is much, much more larger than that. It's our way of being, and it's also our way of knowing. It is a philosophy. That's what Ubuntu is about. Ubuntu is a philosophy. But colonialism decentered it. We've got to now to recenter it, because it has always been part of our. It has always been part of our life. So, in my view, that's how we would embed Mandela, into the work of our university. Thanks.
Thank you, Lutando. You were talking about DNA-related. I can't even find the English word that goes with that. How this becomes part of who we are as human beings, as a university, as a nation, it's a DNA-related matter. And how do we get that? How do we get that back? Yeah. Thank you for that. You also mentioned, which I found very interesting, is making trouble in defense of, which actually recentered. Remember earlier I said, my brain was short-circuiting, VC, when you said good trouble. My brain is now fine, because you because it made sense to me. Not that it didn't make sense earlier, but it made sense to me, defense of something that is good, that VC was referring to earlier as well. So Dr. Moheng, from your point of view, how would you see this embedded in your portfolio?
Thank you so much, Registrar, for that. We have Vision 2030, we've got values, we have our educational philosophy, we've got graduate attributes. And for me, there's an assumption in those. There's an assumption about curricula, core and co-curricular. There's an assumption about pedagogy, an assumption about space in which learning and teaching takes place. There's an assumption about systems that afford those aspirations in our Vision 2030. There's an assumption about processes. So first and foremost, for me, that's important to see that. It also means to me formal access and epistemological access, because at a university we can't shy away from that. And how does that look like for Nelson Mandela University? If we talk about epistemological access, what is it that we're talking about? And for me, an example of how we look at knowledges is in how we design our curricula. For example, we've got the Social Consciousness and Sustainable Futures module, which we would like to see as a program or a qualification at Nelson Mandela University at some point, because it unbounds knowledge. And it looks at knowledge in its multiplicity in terms of transdisciplinarity as well. And it's inclusive, more equitable in how we teach, how we deliver it in different platforms and different ways. So that's one of the things that we are looking at. When I was reading the document also, I find the examples that were made about Mandela and science, Mandela and that, and I am arguing that Mandela cannot be bound in separate disciplines that are predetermined in Eurocentric terms. And I think when we talk about epistemic disobedience, I think we need to be really courageous in terms of challenging those disciplines, And I was listening to Andre now talking about the study of Mandela, which is something that, would be truly African, South African, and listening to Lutano talking about Ubuntu. And how do we then, in our curricula, make these find expression? So for me, that is important. So the way we're viewing learning, teaching, research, scholarship as unconnected, disparate, disassociated acts of academia is problematic. So how do we then view these as interconnected and integrated knowledges which lead to better understanding of a particular phenomena? For example, if you're talking about climate change, how do you look at climate change in its vastness and also allowing different ways of knowing, being, and doing guide you in getting that? And our problem most of the time is to think that knowledge does not include feeling. It's so cold. It's disassociated from who we are as human beings. And I think that's something that we can contribute to knowledge in terms of feeling being something that because, and we call it intuition, and we call it sixth sense, but it's there. But because you can't explain it in a methodology that is predetermined in a certain way, therefore it is not knowledge. So how do we then also in our development of staff help us ourselves understand, how we deal with those knowledges? So then in that unboundedness of knowledge that I was talking about, I think we need a mindset of continuous learning, exploration, and a willingness to embrace the vastness of this knowledge. As I'm going to conclude, don't stress. So I'm then thinking about leading the portfolio by embracing complexity, embracing messiness, listening and respecting multiple perspectives, even though you do not agree with them. But also have courage to disagree. Because sometimes when you are a leader and you disagree, people think that you are not cooperative. But we really should, problematize that and dismantle that. So for me, it's leading change with intentionality and purpose, and striving for all of those values that we have in Vision 2030. And that includes Ubuntu, social justice and equality, striving for excellence. Because I think when people hear social justice, immediately they exclude excellence. And that's a problem. So I'm going to add in there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, you touched on knowledges that includes feelings. That is new, and one needs to explore that. I will leave that to you. It's the DVC of Learning and Teach. How we bring this into, what we learn and what we teach and how we teach that. Professor Moronga, from a research, internationalization and innovation perspective.
How many minutes do I have?
Oh yeah, you're a scientist. 2 minutes.
Okay. And I will be done before then. So thank you very much. So I think at the high level, Andre did summarize some of these things, which I think they sit very nicely. The concept that we have to go beyond ad hoc solutions and emerge at the end with an idea which people will say it's a Mandela way. I think for me that's an aspiration that we need to rally behind, all of us. I think that's one. And of course, that idea does not exclude the coexistence. Yeah? But those multiplicities can coexist as parts of the whole that is going to a particular direction, and they are all complementing each other. I think if we can agree on that they are not pulling in opposite directions, but they are coming from different directions, but they are contributing to the whole. And I think for me, given that we have research, we have got innovation and internationalization, while as far as research and innovation, Andre, that's where you can do lots of experiments. It's not bounded by anything. We can do lots of experiments there. Unlike where if you're going to the curriculum, is it more than 50% or 49 or this, then you have to go that way. In research and innovation, we are at liberty of changing things. I need to say that. So we will need to open new spaces for new ideas, making room for IKS, which, by the way, it's already in the roll call in our institution. And it started long time ago during Feast Must Fall. We will have to grapple with what we saw during Feast Must Fall. And it's a question that we will need to address when a student says gravity must fall. Yeah. So there is an underlying principle behind the person's making the call, and the person might not have been saying gravity must fall, might have been implying that the way things are done, it's not speaking to us. As Lutando was saying, we are neglecting probably where they are coming from, for example, and they cannot comprehend what is it that we are trying to say. And of course, we need to listen to our community, especially as leaders. We cannot transform on our own without listening to the voices of people. In the document speaks to different voices that must be heard. And we need to make sure that we do that so that we work as a community. We pull in the same direction as well. I saw in the document that the values, the document tries to attach the quotations from Mandela. And perhaps while that is good, we might want to lead to what Andre was saying, that what is important is the idea that emerges, because otherwise we will reduce those values to the quotations of Mandela, and probably the values are bigger. They speak to your Ubuntu bigger than a quotation. So we might want to really rethink about how do we want to tie the values with today's topic of Mandela. And then, of course, while I spoke about research and innovation, we have an internationalization strategy. That one, we are not that free in the sense that now we have got geopolitics. What should our internationalization strategy do? At the moment, we are shifting it, what perhaps we call it recentering, decentering, but we are shifting to the global south, to the east, to the BRICS, given what is happening. And that's dynamic. It will change when the geopolitics change. And that's how things are. At the moment, this time, that Mandela, what is the geopolitics saying? At Mandela, of course, we are also shifting, with the most important focal area being our continent. That's probably not many sort of higher education institutions are thinking, and I think this is it's a good strategy for us to align with the continent as well. So we will have limitations, and this is the local versus global. We are part of a global village, but we have local responsibility, and we have to also make sure that we have impact locally as well, and we are relevant locally. So those are the sort of some of the dualities that we will have to balance, being part of the global village but having responsibilities locally. Thank you.
I wanted to comment on what Professor Moronga was saying, but I don't have time. So I will speak during the tea break with you. Professor Keet.
Thanks, Registrar. Thanks once again, colleagues. If one think of Mandela as an idea, then of course across the university landscape and even beyond, you will have different spikes because your knowledges have different formulations. Some will have, better straightforward alignments. Others will have different kinds of angles. And that's actually the way in which the idea of Mandela should emerge within a university space. Differentiated spikes across the system. But the point that Lutando earlier raised is that there must be like a watermark, like an unseen something at the base of all of that may carry the reminder of Mandela, okay? Because otherwise, you may be accused of trying to fit something into a Mandela idea and of course then undermine the integrity of the various types of knowledges. But there can be a constant reminder, a constant watermark. So the Embedding Mandela document will become one of the watermarks for our work. Just to say that document was also generated with a number of focus groups across the university. So it actually captures already some of the voices within the university space. Actually fantastic and energizing to see how our colleagues are engaging with the name Mandela, which is not an easy task at all. And the faculties and the divisions have, have one would metaphorically say, have come to the party. I do agree with Lutando's idea of which I of course convert into the idea of the reminder or the watermark and the disobedient knowledges and troubled knowledges, by the way, if one connected to the theme of the Indaba, and of course Azwi's idea of the big experiment, our portfolio, emerge out of the institutional experiment, so the idea of a socially embedded, responsive university is a key, in the way in which it aligns with the Mandela ethos as well. But part of the logic behind that is that the university will not be able to be responsive if it is not transformative. Okay? And that's the term that we, I think, prefer in the university space, not transforming, transformative, right? The never ending, there's no end point to it. It's a style, it's the soul of the university, it's an orientation of the university. Because different kinds of endpoints of transformation may not lead you to the right place in any case. But a particular kind of, I think the big word is klinemen, the angle of the university would be a transformative angle as well. So we work at the transformative ideal of the university internally for the university to be better at becoming socially responsive. And of course that work, if you look at that as a theoretical frame, you can already see how that work is playing itself out in the university space. It is not a fluke that the hubs of convergence is so successful. It's not because, simply people have generated this particular idea and now it's successful. It is tied into the transformative aspirations of the university and what staff is trying to achieve within the spaces. So engagement as convergence drives transformation, and transformation drives engagement and of course convergence as well. That was the key philosophical backdrop to how we frame the ideal of the university as a socially responsive institution. As a last idea, Edgar, I also think that we must keep turning Mandela on its head as an idea of, if it's a person, on his head, of course, it's but on its head, and that is, to shake it up from time to time and see what kind of new critical treatments we can bring to the notion of Mandela. Now, if one think of it as an episteme, and in the colloquium of 2019, we already engaged with the question of Mandela and African feminism. Of course, there's a number of areas of work. Mandela and science was discussed. There's already an area of work that one can think can come together as a knowledge project. But if one think of the episteme as the conditions and rules that make certain knowledges possible, then if Mandela is the watermark, then of course the possibility of a strong Africanization and indigenous knowledge project will certainly come through, even across the different types of sciences as well. In our own space on IKS and indigenous peoples work, of course, we have, close to 100 colleagues already across the various areas working on that. In fact, by the time that we tried to put a coordination model in place, there were already too many people, involved in this work intuitively, just intuitively, that there is something that needs to be done, and colleagues have started that work. We are now better at, of course, holding that together so that colleagues do not trip over each other's feet in that work. And so, Edgar, as the last point then, is that with regard to entities and programs, I think that part of our big work about the embedding is a work in progress. There's almost like an outline of the sketch of the university moving in a particular direction already visible. I think we should keep on working at it. I think that the embedding document now requires a direct treatment with various knowledges and sciences from the idea of Mandela as a watermark to that particular engagement as well, So what would it mean in a particular knowledge context as well? And sometimes people think that these kinds of matters are impossible, but they are very, very highly possible. To have the retreatment of what we regard as stable knowledges, to unsettle it a bit, to trouble it a bit, to make it a bit more disobedient, to knock it off its track, and of course allow for more productive alternatives then to emerge. So our portfolio, apart from its responsibility within the engagement and transformation space, also have the various entities that we need for the intellectual project that can feed into the transformation and engagement project as well. TIMS will be a very, very crucial entity in holding this particular kind of work together. But I just have to take also my hat off to especially the faculties and the colleagues in the divisions who have been open to struggling with this particular new notion on the table, and that is the academic expression of Mandela. Thank you, Edgar.
Right, thank you, Professor Keert. I'm going to ask our VC to join us on the stage. And then, VC, I'm going to ask maybe in 5 minutes if you would like to give a response, if you like. And then I'm going to ask secondly to our audience, can I cut into your tea time, let's say 10 minutes, to allow 1 or 2 questions? Is that okay? I see some nodding. I'm very democratic about these things. Okay, so so I see the majority has indicated that we can cut into the tea time with about 10 minutes. So VC, maybe just 1 or 2 thoughts in about 5 minutes.
Yes, I won't need 5 minutes. I will need a shorter time so that also there can be time for reflection. I just want to salute the DVCs for their insights and sharing in ways that are much deeper than we can contain in this room, which we need to continue to engage with. Thank you very much, colleagues. You know, I very often close my eyes when I want to think about the work that is embedded in the name and the symbol of Mandela, because I need to close my eyes so that we can see ourselves more clearly. We can imagine the work more clearly, because I have always felt as a leader and a collective of the leaders at university that you really need to be small. You really need to be small in your standpoint and your paradigm in order to do the work properly and with integrity. So that has always been the only way that I have found that we can set an example of, without over-canonizing Mandela, because he himself many times has said that he was a human being like all of us. So for me, that being small in order to foreground the work has been important as our standpoint. And I also want to say, just to concede, that Nelson Mandela's name, it has given us as a university a solid platform to strive to fulfill the role of the university as a force for good, and as to how we can do that with humility as well. Because there is, as the DVC has said, that there is no contradiction between accessible excellence and humility. And I think we have that platform that perhaps other universities do not have, and we need to treat it with respect. And then another thing that always daily comes to mind for me about what the symbol of Madiba teaches us is patience. Patience and selflessness, which is at the heart of the transformative education proposition. So for me, that becomes very, very important as a layer in the paradigm that we hold. And also the question of, if you ask every South African about what they learned from Madiba, whether they are educated or not educated, rural or urban, or coming from all walks of life, is this sense of collectivism. But that did not mean that when he needed to lead, he did not stand up and lead. So, but collectivism was his paradigm, and then that is what South Africans know, and the global community know about him. But also for us, and for me as well, is that we have to accept that Mandela, the social figure, resists ownership. While through the history of his birth, he was born in South Africa. And then when he went to prison, he particularly went to fight, to sacrifice for the freedom of his people. But the depth of his moral standard set in motion a higher global standard. And then it reset they knew, I think, the higher and the stronger ethical spine of what is possible as a proposition for freedom. And because of that, we cannot own him. And we should not own him. So I just want to read one line that former President Ramaphosa wrote in his speech when we launched the name in 2017. He was still the deputy president. He quoted from one of Mandela's letters that he wrote in prison. And I think Madiba never veered from that. And we should not veer from it. He said, "The anchor of all my dreams is the collective wisdom of mankind as a whole." He was writing in prison. "I am influenced more than ever before by the conviction that social equality is the only basis of human happiness." So our task in our small space as a university has been to use education as a canon to live out this ambition. So thank you very much.
Thank you, VC. So I'm going to allow 3 questions. Now we've got 3 blocks. I see your hand. 3 blocks, 1 from each. Colleagues, please ask the question. The keynote we can do later. And then also your question should be to one of the panelists, not to all. Ne? So very focused question to one of the panelists. And then also before you ask your question, just introduce yourself. All right, so I've seen your hand. One from this side. Going once, going twice. Okay, so there's another opportunity somewhere on that side. Is there a question there? No. All right. In the middle, there's 2. One more? No? Okay. Oh, all right, I see your hand there as well. All right, so we'll start with you. Please introduce yourself.
Hello? Okay, perfect. I just want to start off by saying, introduce myself. My name is Diane Claassen. I'm a law student at NMU. I want to start off by saying that I love the institution and I love the opportunity that I've been given to be here. And I know that the registrar said not to ask it to the entire panel, but I do want to ask the entire panel. But the entire panel doesn't have to answer. Just one. Whoever feels courageous enough to answer can do so. But remember, I love the institution. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask, because the entire panel has spoken about making good trouble and recentering Ubuntu, not just as a value, but as a philosophy. Having the courage to disagree, having social justice equate excellence, listening to the voices of the community, because we are a global village with local responsibilities. I think that's something from everyone. But how will the institution be utilizing Mandela and or the philosophy of Ubuntu to make the institution more accessible? Because we've time and time again seen how inaccessible the university can be in terms of many of the issues where there are slight changes or there are inactions that take place through various instances, such as shuttle issues, the inaccessibilities of the shuttles, the dangerousness of the city, and how there is a lack of security and a feeling of safety on the campus, or just a lack of students getting lost in the system, be that academics or co-curriculars, through lack of financing or just support in general.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to make an executive decision That's legal, right? I mean, you're. So I'll ask the DVC people in operations perhaps to touch on some of the matters, because your question also covers, you know, the academics, and maybe during tea break you want to connect with the DVC learning and teaching. Okay, go ahead. You had your hand up, yes? Where's the mic? All right, so maybe ask your question and then we'll come back to you. Go ahead.
Morning, everyone. My question is not actually directed to any of the panels. It's for everyone, actually. So I'm Nontantla, a radiography student. I just wanted to ask, it's not a direct question, but a statement in a way. So as much as we use Mandela's story to inspire new ways of thinking, since he's seen as a hero, a legend in South Africa, why don't we also incorporate the contemporary figures that are in SA to actually inspire more of the students and everyone that is currently living here? Because most times we use Mandela as a figure of everything that we do, but how can we just incorporate other figures that are actually in the yeah, it's long guys. But yeah.
I get the essence of it, yes. Okay. I'm going to ask DVC ETP, Professor Kier, to respond to that one, because he spoke about the watermark, which is what you are, and how do we actually bring in, you know, our current contemporaries. All right. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Registrar. My name is Oloitu Kawuka. I'm a former Secretary General of the SRC. It is an honor to stand in front of this panel today, especially speaking about our national, in fact, an international icon, Nelson Mandela, Rolihlahla Dalibhunga. I want to draw closer to the indigenous aspect of Utatu Nelson Mandela. I think with DVC Peoples and Operations mentioned closely the importance of indigenous knowledge when we speak about Utatu Nelson Mandela. So, you know, when we were growing up, DVC, in our multiracial schools, those who had the privilege to go to multiracial schools, in the curriculum there, very early, around grade 3, grade 2, you are taught about the national icon, Utatu Nelson Mandela. You get to understand where he was born, what year he was born, who was his mother, who was his father. So there was what we call a restation. I'm not sure if it's a... So a restation, we are at a very young age. Yeah. Mandela, Dalibhunga. So the name Rolihlahla was at the center of that teaching. But you mentioned that there are two folds of the name Rolihlahla. And the only one that we know, as people who did not have the privilege to grow up in rural areas, is the Rolihlahla, pull the branch. We do not understand the other meaning of Rolihlahla besides the one of pulling a branch. So it is a direct translation of isiXhosa to English. But unfortunately for us who love things and our parents who took us to multiracial schools, we went there and we were taught otherwise. We were taught to translate isiXhosa to English, unfortunately. So, Rolihlahla, we only know the one meaning, DVC, which is to pull the branch. It was part of our restation. So we want to understand the other meaning of Rolihlahla. Perhaps when we dive deeper into that other meaning, and when we dive deeper into looking at Nelson Mandela as a figure, not just as a former first black president of South Africa, we might find something that would further and assist the cause of decolonizing higher learning institutions. Because when we look at Nelson Mandela, Utatu Nelson Mandela as a figure of research, in the way in which he speaks, in the way in which he was brought up, in the social, in fact, in his civilization, general, many of us who are seated here, who are going to feel represented. As young black people who are sitting here, who are uncomfortable with the social injustices that we're faced with in current society, when we look at the life of Nelson Mandela as a whole, we are going to feel represented because many of us speak the same language as his, many of us were brought up the same way as he was, many of us have the same civilization as himself. So it's going to assist us in the cause of decolonizing what? Higher learning institutions. And perhaps Nelson Mandela University as an institution can be an anchor to all other universities in South Africa, Africa and the diaspora in charging forward the cause of decolonizing education as a whole. Enkosi kakhulu.
Thank you all. There wasn't a question there, but we get the point that you make about the curriculum expansion to include, the meanings that we spoke about this morning. It's a very important point that you made and emphasized, and I'm sure that DVC Learning and Teaching and the DVC RII Research, Innovation and Internationalization had made notes of that. So thank you so much for that. Okay, let's get to Diane's question, DVC people in operations, about access and making it. Do we have mic? Okay. Improving access for students.
Yeah, no, thanks for that difficult question. I mean, we are committed to continuous improvement in the areas you have mentioned as the university. With regards to matters of security, I think, as you have correctly observed, what you experience with regards to matters of crime is in part also a reflection of what is obtaining, in society. So our approach has been basically twofold, addressing matters of security on campus through deploying multiple strategies, including deploying latest technologies and so on. But also then working in partnership with the various stakeholders, external stakeholders, be it the police, be it crime-fighting structures in the metro, both here as well as in George. So, for instance, we've got structures like a campus community safety forum, which is constituted by all these structures, including the police. I chair that. We meet on a quarterly basis. And through those efforts, by the way, our statistics is slowly going down. With regards to shuttles, again, we have recognized that as a challenge. We convened an Indaba, was it in July this year, so that we can then find, as a collective, solutions to these challenges, and it was a successful session, and we are working now towards implementing some of the outcomes, of the Indaba with regards to shuttle. The biggest challenge with regards to shuttle is the vehicle mix. We've got now taxis, no buses, but going forward, we would want to have a mix of buses and taxis so as to ensure that we improve on the efficiencies, of the service. But more broad principle issues, for instance, with regards to matters of safety and security, we would want to call upon all of us to adopt the concept of university citizenship, so that we see the university as ours, we own it, and be active citizens towards ensuring that it exists, in perpetuity, and we work together, in its defense. So we've got to then, as a collective, therefore, liberate, our agency, work together, to deal with these societal challenges, vexing societal challenges. It goes back to the point I was making about what really underpins this democracy of ours. What is it that really holds us together? Did we just not import this concept of democracy and blended it as it is without disciplining it to our context, as an African country? Is it now not showing its ugly head? That look, you did not discipline me. You just imported me with inherent Eurocentric values embedded in it, and thus now, I'm just saying to you, look, I'm inappropriate, for your context. It goes back to the fact that our own civilization was disrupted, and then of course we are also just trying, as the now let me not attribute this to you, Prof. Kiet. We are also just trying as a university to see ourselves as a learner, as opposed to seeing ourselves as a place where others need to learn. But also in that context, we also see ourselves as a learner, learning from society, learning from our students, and so on, which is quite an important paradigm shift. Instead of seeing ourselves as this perfect space that everybody who comes to it must then fit into, to its traditions, and so on, which is why we enter into these partnerships and so on, and hence, for instance, the idea of hubs of convergence. Thanks, Register.
Thank you, DVC. DVC Kiet, just on the question around contemporary figures from Islam Club.
Radla, thank you very much. Beautiful injunction there. So if we can distinguish, and of course there are many more, so it's not only two. So if you look at the historical figure of Mandela, of course, which we carry as legacy institutions, that of course will drive the imagery of Mandela in a more dominant way than others. That's just how that works. But if you look at Mandela as a placeholder, as an idea, it can include as many of the contemporaries, and of course even his contemporaries during his time as well, into that particular fold, set with the parameters, of course, of the kinds of ideas that the institution holds dear and the values. You can see that even in the way in which our institutional public lectures are distributed, who we honor through those lectures. It's a number of Mandela's contemporaries, even contemporaries after Mandela as well. So as a placeholder, the idea of Mandela, not the figure of Mandela, the idea of Mandela should encompass all those with like-minded or similar parameters for making life, in our world. And in that context, of course, there's a great opening already for the ideas that you are putting forward as to how the thinking of contemporary scholars and figures historical figures, social figures are brought into the thinking of Mandela itself. So thanks for that.
Right, colleagues. Yeah, you can clap. Thank you. I want to thank the panel, for the festival of ideas. I don't know about you, but there's so much that we heard this morning, and this is only the start. You can only imagine what's going to come after this. I see some of the other facilitators are now sweating. But I think it has now started the conversations. Remember in the beginning we were talking about contestations and opening spaces. This is one of it. And I like the idea around, you may not like what I'm saying, but we are saying it because it needs to be heard. And so I hope that this morning the panel opened those pathways and those ideas for us. And I am sorry that we've cut into your tea time. But I leave that up to Jenny to figure out how the rest of the day is going to work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the panel and to the registrar for facilitating. So we have lost about 20 minutes of tea break. So so I'm going to suggest that we shift the next panel to 1:15. So it will be a quick tea break, but please go get some coffee and a snack and have a bathroom break, whatever you need to do. And we will start at 1:15. Thank you so much.